America is known as a country full of immigrants, as almost all people in the U.S. are either immigrants or descendants of immigrants. With such a large immigrant population, it is no surprise that some Native Americans are overwhelmed and intolerant to immigrants. Despite facing hardships with restrictive immigration policies and discrimination, from America's founding to the present day, millions of immigrants have found new lives in the U.S. Their stories have been lost in the vast sea of unrecorded history, but today we will learn the personal journey of my grandmother when she immigrated from the Philippines to Canada and finally to America. As evidenced by my grandmother's experience, even if many Americans resist foreigners, immigrants still find ways to thrive in American society. In other words, immigrants are awesome.
My name is Lisa Cruz, and I am an immigrant from the Philippines. In the Philippines, there were no available jobs regardless of your age. There were no toys, and children had to find their own ways of passing time and amusing themselves. In school, supplies weren't given to students and paper did not exist. Some students had only one pencil, others shared pencils, and unfortunate ones had no pencils at all. An interesting experience is that we learned to use any available piece of land to plant tomatoes or green beans. Some hardships were several families lived within the same house, and there was no such thing as individual bedrooms nor beds. People sleep on the floor at night. Cockroaches tried to nibble on your toes, and people scared of them couldn't fall asleep. The buildings were super crowded. There was only a certain time of the night with running water.
My grandparents already spoke English even while they were in the Philippines. Although they still understand Tagalog, this shows that American imperialism affected them in the Philippines.
We immigrated to America because there was a corrupt government in the Philippines. We also wanted our children to have the best education and the best livelihood as possible.
Many immigrants have arrived to America in order to escape corrupt, unstable, or problematic governments that do not allow them to express free will or have opportunities and success. For this reason, immigrants thought that America would offer a better life, and they have often come here believing in the American dream. In addition, U.S. intervention in Asian nations was more often than not the reason for the emigration of Asians from their homelands to the United States, which also applies to the Philippines. Because they were the very people that destroyed immigrants' homelands to begin with, it is ironic that American nativists complain about the way that Asian immigrants ruin American society. Immigrants almost always contribute more to society than they take away. Besides adding diversity to America, they also conserve resources more than your traditional wasteful American consumer. Case in point, my grandmother trimmed the grass with her hands instead of using a lawnmower. My grandfather used one spoon to feed everyone in turn, and my grandfather showered outside in the rain. Even if immigrants aren't beneficial to American society, they certainly do less harm to America than America has done to immigrants and their homelands.
It was quite difficult to come here. We borrowed money from every relative who could spare a peso. Pesos are Filipino currency. It was hard to adjust from a tropical to a temperate climate. We went to Canada before going to America because Canada accepted our immigration papers. America only accepted our petition to immigrate there 2 years later. It wasn't expensive only to come here, but the paperwork was too detailed. I passed the borders and traveled with my husband and daughter Anne and my baby son Albert.
The Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, also known as the Hart-Celler Act, replaced the previous national origins quota system and made preferences for according to categories such as relatives of U.S. citizens or permanent residents, those with the skills deemed useful to the United States, or refugees of violence or unrest. The system placed caps on per country and total immigration, as well as caps on each category. Family reunification was a major goal, and the new immigration policy increasingly allowed entire families to uproot themselves from other countries and reestablish their lives in the U.S.
We expected America to be so much better than in the Philippines. We believe in the American dream of success and opportunity.
Like many immigrants, Cruz had high expectations of a better life in the U.S. Although most immigrants' lives do improve, the realities are much different from their original expectations. Some immigrants even believed that the U.S. was a place in which the poor and hungry did not exist.
People were not as friendly as we thought they would be. We were surprised that there weren't many jobs even for people with good education.
The United States always had a kind of love-hate relationship with immigration, a constant theme throughout its history. In fact, the immigrants of the 19th and early 20th centuries had a saying, "America beckons, but Americans repel." On the one hand, the United States had tremendous employment opportunities for them, possibilities of education for their children, and religious and political freedoms that they couldn't enjoy in their home countries. And yet, at the same time, the foreign-born represented a threat to some parts of the population.
It was most difficult to find a job in America. We were denied services by some Canadian restaurants and shoe stores. We went to the Salvation Army for clothing. We missed the food and relatives back home in the Philippines. We eventually found friends in Canada and America, but even then we were criticized for our skin color. The first time we arrived in Braintree, Massachusetts, vandals slashed 4 tires of our car so that it was beyond repair. They also spray painted the car in black paint with a racist word, chink.
Mainstream America has always seen Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders as foreign and often as threats to American society, regardless of how many generations they have lived in the U.S. As the dominant society feels insecure and anxious about its standing in the global arena, it is ready to scapegoat groups that are foreign in times of economic and political uncertainty. Asian Americans face extensive prejudice, discrimination, and denials of equal opportunity. This discrimination, known as nativistic racism, is especially harsh due to the dual aspects of perceived foreignness of being a non-white racial minority and immigrants.
If you don't keep up, you will eventually find a job. I found some job babysitting before I got trained as a nurse. We got to have our own house to rent, in which the kids could have their own rooms. This is my favorite aspect of America.
Immigrants often had difficulty finding employment in America. Nativists did not want immigrants to have jobs they thought should be reserved for Native Americans.
Schooling was much better in America than the Philippines. The school provided a lot of supplies, as well as books in some cases. The teachers are very good in answering questions and explaining information to confused students. We learned to get McDonald's and other fast food. We also learned how to barbecue and enjoy it with neighbors.
Despite being known as a melting pot that displays international cultures and cuisines, fast food remains an iconic institution in America. The first thing that comes to mind when everyone thinks of America is fast food.
We we still enjoy eating Filipino food. We will go to church on Sundays and holidays like we did in the Philippines.
Assimilation and multiculturalism are the opposing arguments in the debate over the cultural integration of immigrants. The assimilationist perspective argues that ethnic boundaries should be erased as soon as possible and that the immigrants should quickly become Americans. On the other hand, the multiculturalist argues that the immigrants should continue to see themselves as Mexican or Chinese, that the U.S. government should support their efforts to maintain their ethnicity, and that Americans should learn about and value Mexican, Chinese, and other cultures. Cruz has found an intermediate point between these two extremes, which is often the case within immigrant families.
It was overall positive. If you weigh the pros and cons of immigrating, it was better in America than the Philippines. So I definitely do not regret my decision to come here. I would never visit the Philippines again nor move back. It is far too dangerous there with the corrupt government and terrorists. Part of the Philippines is occupied by ISIS. There's nothing in the Philippines you cannot find here, so I don't miss anything in the Philippines. I feel like I belong to American society.
Asian Americans are an extremely diverse minority within the U.S. population, having ethnic and cultural distinctiveness between each group. There are variations within each major ethnicity in terms of socioeconomic class, the number of generations in this country, as well as the degree of assimilation and acculturation. The dominant society, however, has blanketed Asian Americans as one monolithic group, even regarding Pacific Islanders as a part of the Asian umbrella. Whites generally perceive that Asian Americans are foreign due to their racial distinctiveness, regardless of being immigrants themselves or fourth-generation native-born citizens. The general public stereotypes of the Asian Americans foster prejudice against them and deprive them of their individuality and humanity. It is interesting that Cruz feels that she belongs to American society based on the existing stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination against Asian Americans. Yet, that is not to say that exceptions to the general trend cannot exist in specific communities.
Now I still think that people can be whatever they want to be as long as they work hard enough. They could keep on going to school or keep working even after they are dead.